Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
What's up, guys? Welcome to First Cut. This is our review of The Last Dance, at least what we have so far, which is episodes 1 through 4. We're going to focus a little bit on 3 and 4 because that's the last release, but obviously I want to get your thoughts, RB3. This is a big deal. This is ESPN's big documentary of the year. They're putting in a lot of effort, a lot of advertising. Obviously, the people are desperate for any kind of sports content, especially basketball content, and what better to make a documentary about probably the greatest of all time, Michael Jordan. I think he's the greatest of all time, Michael Jordan, and the Chicago Bulls considered to be one of the best teams ever. What are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, this was really exciting, especially as a basketball fan. There wasn't much to look forward to, particularly during this quarantine. Right now, we would have been in like NBA playoff territory, would have been approaching the finals in a few weeks. So there hasn't been nothing to stimulate that. Thank goodness they've been having this documentary in development and ready for release like pretty soon. Right now, I'm glad they're releasing it 2 by 2 each week instead of doing a long, dragged out, like one part at a time. I think that's really, really great. I think what we've seen so far in this documentary is a lot of unused footage, a lot of stuff that they recorded back in the 1997, 1998 season that was never before seen. And a lot of this stuff is just amazing content all around. The interviews that they're getting is amazing. The storytelling themselves, the way they kind of break up each episode by telling the story of like individual players and Phil Jackson, obviously, of course, giving you a lot of backstory as to these people, because as much as I'm a basketball fan, as much as I'm a Michael Jordan fan, as much as I'm a Scottie Pippen fan and Dennis Rodman fan, Phil Jackson fan, there's a lot that I didn't know about their backstory, them growing up, and that this documentary is just kind of presented to us. So it's really, really great stuff all around.
Yeah, I think that's what we should say, right? We didn't grow up the Michael Jordan era because unfortunately we're much younger. Obviously, you're much younger than me, but I grew up with the Kobe era. Early 2000s is kind of the vibe that I came with, obviously, with my age. And I'm assuming you came up with that too, obviously, in a much, much younger phase in your life. But that was kind of my era. My idea was the Phoenix Suns, obviously, because I'm wearing the Suns hat right now. But that's what I grew up with. I grew up with Nash versus Kobe in the West Coast kind of vibe. And I didn't have the Chicago Bulls to kind of grow up and watch. Michael Jordan won his first championship when, I was barely being born. So this is an opportunity for us basketball fans who are younger to go back and watch the greatness that was Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls, especially with the first 2 episodes that focuses on his killer instinct and on his mentality of being a win at all costs kind of guy. I believe that Michael Jordan has been on the record to say that later on in the documentary, you might not like who he is. What do you think of that whole aspect of kind of tearing down the pure image that is Michael Jordan?
Well, Michael Jordan has never been like one of the innocent people in basketball history, period. I mean, he's always had a reputation of being tough, being hard on players. Just from a business perspective alone, a lot of people criticize the Jordan brand in and of itself for the harm it's kind of doing to, Black youth, Black communities, all that kind of stuff too. So he's always had like this kind of divisive reputation, nevertheless. But seeing this firsthand, I mean, it kind of humanizes him a lot too. I think it gives you a lot of sympathy, at least for the first 2 episodes, about his killer mentality. He was, at least in the second episode, they go deeply into how much, when he first came into the Bulls, they were having kind of a losing record, and he had injured himself, and he had to play some time on the bench, and he was only allowed to, and then he was eventually only allowed 7 minutes a game, and the Bulls were kind of losing games, and the ownership was okay with it, and he just was very irate about that not being his philosophy of basketball. His only philosophy of basketball is to win, is to terrorize, is to get championships. And that's the kind of mentality that, frankly, has lived on through, the great Kobe Bryant, RIP. And through Kobe, as a young kid myself, I got to see that and witness that and be inspired by that too. That's always kind of the mentality that I've always tried to carry and tried to hold high on myself and be super competitive and try and grind to get to the best. So it's good seeing that like communicated through Michael Jordan. And I can see a lot of his heart and his dedication, his passion, and they do a really good job of setting that up. Now, as to what we're going to see later, I'm ready to see that too. I'm honestly glad there's going to be kind of like this unraveling of who Michael Jordan is to the public. eventually. But I think what we're doing so far, is pretty humanizing, is pretty sympathetic to who Michael Jordan is in general.
Yeah, I think so far it is. I'm pretty sure they said that later on they're going to show some scenes that are a little bit tougher to get through as far as Michael Jordan, which I'm excited for, just because I feel like during his era, there wasn't as much attention as there is now. I think now Michael Jordan would have a hard time getting away with what he's done in the past. Just because there's a lot of attention, especially on social media and NBA Twitter. But my thing, too, is the idea of the Mamba mentality that you're talking about, which was instilled from Michael Jordan into Kobe Bryant, and the idea that the same guy behind him is Phil Jackson. You could almost say that Phil Jackson kind of inspired the Mamba mentality that's inside both these players. Obviously, we're going to get to Phil in episode 4, which I'm excited for because I think his episode is probably the strongest one so far. But I want to get to the little mini documentaries that they do about certain players. They started with episode 2 with Scottie Pippen, and then episode 3, Dennis Rodman. Obviously, my biggest takeaway from Pippen was just how good Pippen was. People forgot how good Scottie Pippen was. He was one of the league's best players, and he could have been a number 1 on any team during that time. He could have been the guy, the star of a team, but he chose to have that. Michael Wilbon called it the Robin mentality, but I said Nightwing because I think Nightwing's cooler and he's kind of the grown-up, stronger version that could actually keep up with Batman, but have that Nightwing mentality to keep up with Michael Jordan and be his number 2 and be his go-to guy. What'd you think of the Pippen angle to this whole thing and remembering how great Pippen was?
Pip has always been acknowledged as, Michael Jordan said a number of times there will be no Michael Jordan without Scottie Pippen. And this documentary definitely did a good job of communicating that. It showed you how much of a crucial part and the crucial asset that Scottie was. I believe the stats that they showed on screen that he was second in points, second in steal, or something like second in rebounds or something like that. Some crazy statistic. First in steals, first in assists, but still like highly undervalued as a player too, like in terms of payment. And, especially in today's era, that's really sad to see, especially considering people like Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Damian Lillard, they're getting $100 million, $200 million, $300 million contracts, the super max stuff, that, Scottie was only paid like $18 million over 7 years. That's really unfortunate, but it does give you a look into Scottie Pippen's life and how his parentage is growing up, and really heartfelt stuff when it goes into the fact that he had a father who had a stroke and became kind of paralyzed. And then he also had a brother who had experienced that same kind of thing as well. These are, again, more things I didn't even know about Scottie Pippen. I've been following basketball for years, but these are things you just didn't know. And you could see the rationale of him making the decisions that he made. And then you could see how human all these basketball players are too, because while you're watching these championship dominant Chicago Bulls, when they come out to the scary music every time they come out to play in the playoffs, you see like these superheroes, like these like iconic figures that are like undefeatable. But when you really like look into their actual stories and look into what was going on with them at the time, they're actually very human. They're actually very flawed. The fact that Scottie did take that time off during the summer season to not heal from his injury and not get treatment for his injury and wait until the season started. That just goes to show, I mean, he was just a man who was trying to deal with that conflict within him and trying to figure out a way that he can rationalize the decisions that he made. And even Phil Jackson said as much in that episode too. Like, you just got to kind of let players deal with what they're dealing with. You can't really step in the way of that. And salute to Phil Jackson too, because I've been saying this for a while, but I've been listening to the audiobook for that book, The Last Season, which is about the 2000, if I'm not mistaken, 2002, 2003 season between with the Los Angeles Lakers. That was that at the time was seen as the last season for Phil Jackson in the Lakers organization. And that book is really compelling too, because you see a lot of the same overlapping themes. You see a lot of themes of like underpayment becoming a conflict between players. You see a lot of these issues between players and management, organization, and how Phil Jackson's kind of remained consistent in addressing all of those concerns, and his like kind of hands-off approach and kind of making sure that the focus stays within the game of basketball, using like his Buddhist, like Zen kind of mentality is really, really fascinating too. It really goes to show what good leadership is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obsessed with Phil Jackson, to be honest, especially after watching that last episode, which is what I said, episode 4. I definitely want to get to him, but I kind of want to go chronologically and follow up with episode 3, which is about the man himself, Dennis Rodman, as we know, the notorious Dennis Rodman, who back in the day came from this guy who had a really crazy upbringing and didn't grow up with basketball to becoming one of the most tenacious defensive players and rebounders of all time when it comes to NBA. And the way that Phil Jackson handled him is something so curious and interesting. But do you remember Dennis Rodman, man? Because I feel like I do, because I grew up with the the mentality of the Dennis Rodman Hollywood lifestyle. But the kind of energy that Rodman brought into an NBA locker room and into the bridge between Hollywood and basketball and NBA mentality, that bridge, I feel like Rodman is kind of the guy who bridged the gap more than anyone else. What do you think of that episode?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. And, nowadays we really remember Dennis Rodman, unfortunately, with his like connections to like Kim Jong-un and like North Korea. And it's kind of funny that they aired this episode like the same week that we're getting news of Kim Jong-un dying. We get the Dennis Rodman coverage. I'm surprised they didn't mention any of that, but I'm sure that's going to come later on down the line. But he's eccentric. He's always been somebody who I've always recognized as eccentric, but this documentary also shed light to how good of a basketball player he is and how professional he was and how he would go out and party till 5 a.m. and then be in practice the next morning like nothing happened. I mean, that's an extraordinary feat in and of itself. I don't know how this dude was doing it. I don't know what kind of rest. I don't know but he already, and I think what is an interesting dynamic between what we see Dennis Rodman differ from like Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen is that, and the rest of the Bulls team is that, with Mike, he always had like a killer mentality, but it developed. With Scottie, he had this killer mentality, but it developed further under Michael Jordan. But Dennis Rodman was already coming off of championships with the Pistons, and he had a run before he was with the Bulls. So he brought a level of like experience and professionalism that really set the Bulls off to the next level. He was snatched down 15, 18, 20 boards in the game, and like it was nobody's business, and still be hooking up with like Madonna in Las Vegas. So it was just like this crazy dynamic that he's probably the most entertaining person that's ever crossed the NBA, at least at that time. I mean, right now you kind of see like, or at least like when I was younger, you saw like Ron Artest kind of embody that as well. But yeah, I mean, Dennis Rodman, man, that's some good stuff right there.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I kind of brought the whole Hollywood angle, but that's kind of the angle he went with. He kind of brought this idea that professional athletes hanging out and being friends with actors and directors and producers and musicians was actually, I think he normalized it. I think more than anyone else, because back in the day, that wasn't, they would know each other, but they didn't hang out and they weren't friends. But I feel like Rodman is, especially that scene when he's hanging out with Carmen Electra and her friends, and they're all like in a party and he's raising a toast. I feel like that's him saying, these are my friends. This is my crew. This Hollywood party, crazy 90s crew is what I consider to be, my comfort zone. And I found that to be so interesting because nowadays, obviously, we have that all over the place.
You can't see Kevin Durant without Drake like these days.
Yeah,
it's gonna happen.
Like nowadays, it's normal, right? Like almost every NBA player is with some sort of model or actress or Instagram star, and I feel like it's so normalized now. But back in the day, Dennis Rodman was kind of the bridge between that and Hollywood, and was kind of obsessed with him because he was that weird basketball guy.
Yeah, but back in the days, and they even talked about even Michael Jordan, which was funny because Michael Jordan had this whole controversy on Twitter after the first one aired about him dry snitching, right? Like how he was telling that whole story.
It's stepped up in episode 4. I tweeted about it because I thought it was so funny.
Yeah, but just the idea of like him being a freshman or a newbie on the Bulls, and he walks into this hotel room and sees him doing all this like blow and drugs and alcohol, all that kind of stuff.
He's snitching on everybody, bro.
Yeah.
He called out Carmen Electra,
Yeah.
or she called herself out. Scott Burrell, that scene
Yeah.
was so funny to me when he's like, "Hey, Scott's crazy. Like he's got like different, side chicks," and he's like,
Yeah.
"Michael, what are you doing, man? You can't say that."
Yeah.
That was so funny, but it also reminds you of Nick Young and D'Angelo Russell, right?
Oh yeah,
Like that was a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, that was more, 20 years later that, you can't really snitch. I mean, the statute of limitation, I think is a little expired there, but Nick Young and D'Angelo Russell, that was wrong. That was wrong on the level of that was your current teammate. You're doing it right then and there.
I feel like that's more of a Michael Jordan can get away with it kind of thing. In my opinion.
Yeah, but D'Angelo Russell is no Michael Jordan.
Exactly.
So he can't be sabotaging the Lakers like that. That was disrespectful.
Hey, he's on the Wolves now, man. You never know.
Yeah.
Obviously, this follows up with the firing of Doug Collins and with the hiring of Phil Jackson, which introduces the triangle offense into the Chicago Bulls, which is kind of their trademark, and which is obviously Phil Jackson's trademark, which he got from Tex Winter, who was a big proponent of it just way back in the day. When they showed that 1950s footage of him teaching it in Kansas State, it was absolutely fascinating. But Phil Jackson, man, like, again, we already talked about it and we haven't even gotten into it, but oh my God, like, people forget this guy has won 11 championships as a head coach. And everyone's like, dude, he has Michael and all that. But think about it. Michael Jordan spent how many years? Maybe 4 or 5 years in the league, being the scoring champ, being the best player in the NBA, scoring 50 points a game, but winning 0 championships. He did not win a single championship until Phil Jackson came in, and he won it. The second year that Phil Jackson was coaching the Bulls, they won their first championship. Phil Jackson is the difference maker in a championship team, and he proved that throughout the entire history of the Bulls and throughout his entire career. What do you think of the Phil Jackson episode? Because I think this guy, as weird as people think he is, I think he's fascinating.
Yeah, he's super fascinating, super knowledgeable, cares deeply about the game of basketball, cares deeply about sportsmanship and teamwork. And that's what's important. As much as Doug Collins, and I love Doug Collins as a coach, especially what they showed in his documentary. But as presented in the documentary and what appears to be true in real life, the sport of basketball is not an individual sport. There's no I in team. You got to build on the team mentality, and just feeding the ball to Michael never really worked. Same reason why the Lakers were so successful over the years that they have, Phil, is because it wasn't just Kobe. It was Kobe and Shaq, or it was Kobe and D. Fish, or it was Kobe and Paul Gasol, or Andrew Bynum before he got like 90-year-old knees on him. So it's like all of these so when you see what Phil Jackson is doing over time and over the span of his entire career is expanding the game of basketball outside of the individual. And the triangle offense is kind of like a perfect encapsulation of that. It became so deeply enrooted in these characters. I watched the interview with Scottie and Scottie and Rodman on ESPN back in like 2019. And they said like those three, they never really talked to each other like during the season, during practices or whatever. They really just played basketball. But they would subconsciously, whenever they went to a restaurant or something, they just subconsciously found themselves sitting in a triangle. And that's just how deeply embedded that like philosophy and that mentality was always into them. And that's, that just shows the uniqueness and the kind of out of the box thinking that's required to be a champion.
Dude, triangle for life, bro.
Yeah.
I feel like people have made a joke about it now, at least in my NBA podcast that I listen to, because it's so funny at this point. But episode 4 concludes with obviously the Detroit Pistons finally being defeated by the Bulls, but even more importantly, the Lakers losing, I think, 4-1 in a 5-game kind of blowout. They lost the first game in Chicago, but they came back and won 4 in a row, which is kind of, what we see nowadays with the Warriors, or at least I think it was 2 years ago when they did that. But this was funny to me because what stood out, honestly, was watching Magic Johnson versus Michael Jordan, that whole angle, but watching, in my opinion, Scottie Pippen versus Magic Johnson, and how Scottie Pippen's the D that everyone talks about on First Take, on The Jump, on every ESPN show, and how Scottie Pippen's defense was crazy. Seeing that full court press on Magic Johnson, dude, I can't lie. I was like, oh, damn, Scottie can play defense. Like, that's defense. And obviously this was a different era where defense can be a little bit tougher, a little bit in your face, more in your face. When you see Scottie Pippen full court press Magic Johnson, I was like, that's what did it. That won the first championship to me. I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a different brand of basketball back then. I mean, they even go as far as showing that when they were playing the Pistons and how the Pistons were a super dominant, super physical team.
They would actually hit you.
Yeah, no, they'll throw elbows, and they even said in the interviews, like, if you're gonna throw an elbow, make sure it hits. Like, don't do it on accident, do it on purpose. So that's the kind of tough. And today, honestly, I mean, that's a brand of basketball that you just won't see today anymore.
Yeah.
Is it a good thing that it's gone? Is it a bad thing? That's yet to be determined. But yeah, I love seeing that, and I love seeing that kind of bully ball that they've been dealing with the Pistons over the past like 3 or 4 years before they went up against the Lakers. They kind of had to implement that onto the Lakers in order to win.
It was incredible.
It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see the Lakers lose to Chicago Bulls. But they had their run. I mean, we had 11 championships.
21 years.
We've had 11 championships since, so it's all good.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, man, my biggest takeaway, and this could kind of be our conclusion for this episode and our review and our recap, was seeing Michael Jordan, and obviously we've seen it before, but just seeing it after this 4 episodes of this documentary, just really just cry his eyes out and bawl. Winning his first championship, like winning meant so much to this guy, and it's not even like it's just winning. Like it's not even personal accolades. It's not even being famous. He just wanted to win, and having that trophy and kind of putting his face on the trophy and leaning his head towards it and just start crying like a little kid was truly amazing. At least for me to see after 4 episodes of hearing about this crazy, psychotic, badass who just murders everyone on the basketball court. Obviously, we can conclude with that, but what was your thoughts on seeing that again?
Well, yeah, I mean, we see all those pictures of Michael Jordan when he won, and, and the documentary does a really good job of emphasizing that, like, at the time, his only knock against his career was that he didn't have a championship. And that's the same thing. LeBron's been hungry, man. LeBron's been hungry.
But he's got 3.
He's got 3, but before he had those 3, I mean, that's why he had to get off the Cavaliers. I mean, he made the biggest decision of his life to leave his hometown and go to a much bigger market and become with a much more dominant, the first ever super team, I feel like, in the Miami Heat in 2006, and literally just for the sole reason of winning a championship. So that when you have that one personal goal, when you've achieved everything else in the world, and there's one goal that you've yet to hit, and after 5, 6, some odd years of trying to get there, you finally get there. It's heart-wrenching. So the documentary, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the documentary does a great job just through editing. And this is one of the best edited documentaries ever, sports documentaries ever, in terms of pacing, in terms of storytelling, in terms of narrative, as it goes in and out of timelines and kind of all leads to the same story. It does a great job of emphasizing the competitive nature of Michael Jordan and why this big crucial moment will be so important to him.
Think about it now. I mean, obviously, we're both huge basketball fans. I follow basketball all the time. I listen to as much as I can. I read as much as I can. And I feel like the chase for the ring is something that's so precious to basketball, almost more than any other sport. Obviously, we can talk about the NFL and how winning the Super Bowl is like the biggest deal. And it is. But I feel like if you're the greatest basketball player ever, winning a championship is like the most important thing. And that's how you define legacy, and that's how you define victory, is winning championships. So obviously this documentary is sweeping the nation. People are going crazy. My dog's going crazy.
Yeah, it's beautiful, it's elegant, everything. Like I said, that behind the scenes footage, I don't know if they shot it, they must have shot on like 35mm or something like that, because it just looks notably better whenever they have like the footage from the 97 98 season. The photography, just everything about it just is absolute perfection on ESPN's part and Netflix's part.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about it every week, guys, so make sure you guys tune in right here to First Cut, our YouTube channel. Subscribe right here if you haven't done so already, and tune in next week where we talk about episodes 5 and 6. For Ace and RB3, we are peacing out. Peace out, guys.